Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. With the next round of peace talks to end the protracted Naga political problem scheduled for October 31st, the Nagaland and Manipur governments have taken steps to meet any eventuality and have put their respective police forces on high alert. Officials said in Kohima, the Nagaland government has directed all deputy commissioners of the districts and administrative officers to remain in their place of posting and within their jurisdiction till further orders. In neighbouring Manipur, where Nagas have a sizable presence, security forces in the state have been put on high alert and a large number of security forces, including women personnel, have been deployed at important areas to thwart any unwanted activities. The crucial round of talks on October 24th to find a lasting solution to the 7-decade-old Naga insurgency problem has remained inconclusive. Naga tribal organizations, civil societies and political groups have been saying that any agreement on the Naga issue should be inclusive, honourable and acceptable to all sections of the people. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyse the history of the Naga issue, the problems and the way forward. Joining me on the program today are Sandeep Phukan, Deputy Editor of The Hindu, Joyita Bhattacharjee, Senior Fellow, Observer Research Foundation, Gautam Sen, former Advisor, Government of Nagaland, and Shekhar Iyer, Senior Journalist. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Sandeep Phukan, let me begin the program with you. Let's first try and analyse, try and understand and put into perspective what the Naga talks are all about.
Well, essentially, you know that this is, as you know, that as you rightly said, that this is a 7-decade-old insurgency problem. The Nagas want the starting point is a separate sovereign separate state of Nagaland. Now that sovereignty is out of the question. So one has to, and we have seen, cyclical phases of violence followed by dialogue, and this has been the longest ever ceasefire that the government of India has had with the most influential Naga group, the NSE and IM. Now, why are we discussing this at this stage? Because there is a framework agreement to solve the Naga issue, as it were, was signed some time back by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government, but the nitty-gritties were still being worked out, and there is a deadline that is approaching, October 31st, by which the centre wants to settle the Naga issue. Now, what exactly is the Naga issue, you may ask? Now, that's the tricky question. As I said, it started off with a demand for a separate state, as in state when I mean nation, separate nation, Naga state, separate from India. Now, that is not a position that India would negotiate at any stage, right? So, it has been a come down, and it has been now a negotiation as to what can be given to the Naga people to protect their history, their language, their identity, their uniqueness of culture. So, this is what has been talked about and negotiated for so long.
Right.
And now several other, as you rightly said, several other groups, I mean NSE and IM is one of the key players, which is in a ceasefire with the government of India. They were an underground militant group, but there are other organizations that have come together. Civil society, the church plays an important role, the Naga Ho. So all of them, Mr. Sen will be able to tell you more about this.
Absolutely.
But all of them have come together, and the idea is also to create a separate state of Naga Claim.
Sure.
That creates separate. When I mean a separate state, means a separate province within the Indian Union, but integrating Naga dominated areas, and that is the tricky part, because that will lead to division of states like Manipur and Assam, which is a
we'll come to that in just a bit. Let me get the others into the picture as well. Since you took Mr. Sen's name, let me pose the next question to Mr. Sen. So, Mr. Sen, who are all the key stakeholders as far as the Naga issue is concerned, and what is their principal demand?
You see, I'll put it like this. You see, the stakeholders are not restricted to Nagaland alone. As my colleague Mr. Phukan mentioned, the adjoining states, because of the historical nature, the ethnic composition, And even I would say the Nagas across the international boundary in Myanmar, they are also somewhat, it impacts them. So there are multiple stakeholders. Now these stakeholders have different political configurations. So we cannot be oblivious to those factors. Second is, within the Naga society also, the aspirations are not, I would say, uniform. There are various ethnic groups, and certain groups, like particularly the Angamis and the Semas and the Aos, whatever aspirations they have, there will be shades of difference of theirs vis-a-vis the others, the minor. But the stakeholders are multiple, and they are not confined within the Indian nation state only. So we have to reckon these factors while deliberating and striving to arrive at a modus vivendi.
Sure. Okay. Joyita Bhattacharya, let me bring you into the picture now. So as far as some of the issues are concerned, of course, Sandeep touched upon them in his opening remark. But as the issues stand, what are the most tricky issues, the most debated issues, and the issues that still remain unresolved?
Definitely, we have seen a change. I would go with my co-panelist that there has been a severe change where from the Naga insurgency had started 70 years back, and slowly with dialogues, we have seen changes. Now, the most tricky issue that really stands is that the issue of Naga constitution and the national flag. And I think this is the most sticking point right now, that they need to negotiate, because because for last few weeks I think there has been constant dialogue going on, and there has been some positive developments, because this talk is not only includes NSC and IM, there are other organizations also, because in 2017 we have seen seven groups coming up and joining, and in the last talks there has been positive developments. So there is a view among the people that while these are the important issues, they need to go ahead, because they think that these the negotiations and talks have come at a point, and most importantly the seriousness that Government of India is showing, probably they will not get any further chance. But still this is area that needs debated. But I think when these kind of important issues comes, there is also a view in Nagaland that these issues need to be debated more from a democratic perspectives. But we have to watch. I think the time is ticking, and the negotiations need to focus on these issues, because there are other issues. But most importantly, I think integrating the Naga society will be most important aspect of this.
Okay, integration of the Naga society is something that is most important, is what you're suggesting. Shekhar Iyer, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. So how has the Naga claim for a greater Nagalim and other issues played out in recent times?
You see, two things have happened, since we had this framework agreement. See, it has gradually begun to dawn on the Naga leadership as well as the Naga people, and particularly the young people, that too much of time has been lost on, this kind of long drawn thing. And today the Naga youth is more than eager compared to previous times, that somehow they should, the fruits of development should come faster. Today, if you see, people from Nagaland are, all over India, they are working, they are serving, and they have been moving into some of the very high-tech industries also. Earlier the thing was Nagas were normally recruited in the security forces. That picture has gradually undergone change. So there is a lot of pressure even on the very Naga leaders, whether it is NSCN factions or even the NNPG, which is the Naga National Political Groups, that somehow they should reach an accord. But the problems are, as was mentioned by Joyita, that the main problem is only that issue, that how do we get an agreement which appears to protect our honor and integrity. So there is a lot about the sentiments which are involved, because I think by now it has dawned on these very Naga leaders that it is not possible to rewrite the boundaries. That is something has come through the talks also, because we have had the person who was actually negotiating all these years, Mr. Ravi, R.N. Ravi, who is also now the Nagaland governor. See, he has been able to convey to them, look, there are certain realities and certain difficulties that have even become more serious than before, which is you cannot redraw boundaries. That is very clear. Now, the second thing is, what else can be done to protect this honor and integrity and give a sense of, because it has to be a win-win situation, a situation in which the Naga groups feel that they have, because the whole battle all along, right from the time when Piso launched his movement and declared his federal government of Nagaland underground, right from the time, it has been all about the Naga honor. So, how do you protect that honor without actually, working out what was mentioned as Greater Naga Claim, all the Naga contiguous areas, whether it is in Myanmar or Manipur or in Mizoram, that kind of grand idea is, there are practical difficulties. I think the Naga groups realize this, and Naga people in particular, who I must say are very great people, because I have had the opportunity to serve in Kohima as a correspondent. Those days as a UNI correspondent I was there, and those were the times when I have seen this when SC Jamir was chief minister, and this issue has been there, and the people are what I must say is very proud people, but at times the issue of honor was always something there. So therefore I feel what is the formula that is being worked out, what we get to understand, perhaps there could be some kind of an autonomous governing council or some kind of autonomous bodies in those areas in Manipur or in the neighbouring, say even Arunachal Pradesh, which could specifically tackle the local Naga issues.
Right.
Of course, in order to give them that sense of that pan-Naga feeling, there is a talk of creating a body which can perhaps address all the Naga culture issue, Naga language issue, other identity issues, which can be beyond boundaries without affecting the boundaries.
Right.
That is also one thing which is there. And then the other big question, I think, which is a very big question, is all those underground guerrilla fighters, all those NSC and some of them, they were allowed to keep arms. So there are issues like that. See, how do you integrate them into society?
Right.
Who have been, die-hard fighters. So that is a much bigger issue.
Sure.
And what kind of models can you follow? Because you had a surrendered Ulfa model in Assam, you had surrendered Naxalite model earlier in Bengal and in Chhattisgarh. So what kind of a model where they can actually give up that guerrilla life and come back to, already you have seen since the ceasefire, you have seen that lot of them have got settled to some kind of a normal life.
Right.
But these issues are actually there are a lot of ground issues.
Right. Okay. So that having been said, I'm going to take the some of the points that Mr. Iyer is making forward. Sandeep, let's not forget that some of these Naga groups have lost some of their tallest leaders over the last 2 or 3 years. So is that also playing on the minds of some of the younger folk, and that's why they want to put an end to this and get this done away with as well as soon as possible?
No, I mean, there is also a new leadership that has emerged. I mean, if you're talking about NSA, so they have a new chairman in NSA and IM, but there is, I'm not sure if there is a sense of restlessness among youth because these are issues that will take time. I mean, it's taken decades to reach where they have, but I slightly beg to differ from other panelists insofar as saying that this flag and the constitution is a sticky issue. I will explain why I say this. Yes, in the backdrop of the Kashmir decision of Government of India, where the special status for Kashmir was taken away under Article 370 and there is no separate flag and no separate constitution now. So, it is very difficult for the Government of India to recognize a separate constitution and a separate flag for the Naga people. That was one of the key demands. I am sure in the backdrop of the Kashmir decision, the Naga groups also understand this. But I think it is also true that as Mr. Iyer very rightly said, that the honor of Naga people is paramount. It has to be a win-win deal. They will have to come up with the Government of India has to come up with a deal that appears respectable to the Naga people. And how would they deal with this fact? Because, as in the beginning of the program, as we said, and as you said, that already government orders have gone out to all the commissioners, to all the police stations, cancelling their leaves to stock ration for 2 months, which means that there is already anticipation of the trouble that if the government goes ahead and announces a decision minus the 4 Naga dominated districts of Manipur, how will it play out on the ground? If they give it, of course, Manipur will be up in flames. If they don't give it, then how will the Naga people react? It's an equally emotive issue in the areas bordering Assam, you know, the Sonari, Golaghat, these are districts where you keep having these tensions between Assam and Nagaland. So, this, you know, either way, it's going to be a very tricky issue, very, very sensitive, which is why all these things will be important. So, NSE and IM, if they are saying at this stage, after having discussed for decades, if they are saying that, you know, this is a non-negotiable thing, the flag and the constitution, it's equally non-negotiable for Government of India, isn't it? Especially with the bag, especially in the bag. So, wouldn't they know this? So, I suspect that it could be just a reason for being unable to secure what many would believe that the right reflection of Greater Nagaland, which is that, you know, all the contiguous areas with substantial Naga population to be identified as one province.
Sure.
That is unlikely to happen, or if it happens, as I said, it's going to be a very, very volatile decision.
Okay.
Even the mention of it in press or media creates trouble. So, you can imagine if a decision is taken this way or that way, what kind of impact it may have, one has to wait.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Mr. Sen, that, you know, taking the discussion forward now, how is a final agreement likely to impact some of the neighbouring states, and what kind of a scenario do you foresee really as for the other states?
Actually, the final scenario is not clear. So, unless you know what is the configuration of that new understanding, how will you, I mean, come to conclusion on the you know, impact it will have on the other states? The concept of, I would tend to agree with Mr. What Fukan said, honor, and honor is perhaps the main key thing which stands out. Unless that is accommodated suitably to the satisfaction of the general Naga people, I think it will be very difficult. I mean, it will precipitate the situation. And the other thing is shared sovereignty is a very sensitive term, but I personally feel that it can still be accommodated within the greater Indian nationhood, something like that. Actually, then the question of flag. Flag is of course maybe an issue, but then, you know, let us look at it from another point of view. Like in a district council, you have a flag of the district council, if you have something like that. You don't have a Naga ethnic flag, something of that nature. But of course, these are things, but main thing is how the honor of the Naga people are protected, are perceived to have been protected. That will be a determinant in what is the outcome of what is happening now. And I regret, you know, in one way that the Naga church fraternity has perhaps not played out as they should have. Had it been a little more different. Now, the impression I gather, you know, since my, I'm talking about the late 90s, when actually the ceasefire came in 96 and all that. The church was something more active, and they were actually leading the discourse in to an extent. But that is not happening now. So, that is perhaps the bane of the situation now. So, I really
understand that, sorry to intervene, sir, but I understand that the Government of India has taken sort of much strength from the church, though they haven't made a public statement. But if you recall, in the last few days, the government, at least in terms of news that is coming out from government sources, indicates that the government could go ahead with a solution if the Naga national political groups, it's a conglomeration of 6 organizations, if they agree to this deal, then they could even go ahead minus the NSE and IM, one of the most original key players. And I am told by very reliable sources that the reason for this confidence is that the church could be backing whatever solution is brought. But again, as we said, that it's a bit like boxing in the dark, because we really don't know what the text is, we don't know what the details are, we don't know what will be agreed to. It's a fair...
No, I agree with you, but what I meant was perhaps the church's role could have been something more definitive.
Okay, all right. So, Joyita Bhattacharya, let me bring you in now. So, since we don't know what exact shape that the final agreement will take, we do know that the agreement was signed in August 2015. That was, of course, the framework agreement. So do we know the contours of that agreement and how things have transpired since then?
To be very frank, that August 2015 agreement is under wrap. So nothing much we know about the public domain, but definitely the developments that we have been seeing, that agreement has put a major impetus to reach whatever the situation has arrived today. So this is something, an area we need to understand. But I think that somewhere or the other, somewhere the Naga groups also have realized that somewhere they have to reconcile with the realities of the changing time. And these realities definitely has played a major role also in changing the thinking of the Naga people. Because today the youth we see, they really want peace, they want development, and I would agree that the church's role has been a very positive when it comes to Naga peace process building. But recently I was going through a couple of news items, and I have seen somewhere there is a little resentment among some people who really played some groups who played a very positive role, like the Naga Mothers Association. They played a major role, but recently they have expressed that somewhere or the other their voices have not been properly covered in the present negotiation that is going on. I strongly believe that if we really want to have a very positive development, we have to bring in all the groups together. It's not only the people in the armed, because there is a large population in Nagaland. They really want peace, prosperity, and we have to understand that Nagaland right now is an integral part of India.
Right.
And there has been a popular support. So these counters also need to be included.
Okay, sure. Okay, Mr. Iyer. So the deadline of wrapping up talks arrives this week. Do you see the deadline being met? What happens if the deadline isn't met?
Actually, because of the talk of a deadline, actually is creating more, I would say, anxiety as well as pressure. But the basic thing is, of course, you see, it's very clear now. Neither the Naga groups can go back to their old ways of insurgency, because insurgency will no longer pay, just as terrorism will no longer pay, And so that is one side. Similarly, Government of India also understands it is no longer possible to keep adopting the same approach which they have done all along, which is dealing with the issue heavy hand. But at the same time, you must realize, after even the framework agreement, we have seen some kind of actions by special forces along the borders with Myanmar or even Arunachal, or wherever some of the recalcitrant members of these very groups which are party to the agreement have been showing signs of return to that earlier ways and methods. We have seen how New Delhi has sent a message of firmness. So therefore there are two, I would say, the two limits which is cast on both sides. So the whole effort will be, I feel, whether this deadline stays or not, the whole idea is, because I tend to compare it with the situation in Mizoram. You remember the times when the Laldenga surrender, which I had covered, and followed by election in Mizoram which happened. See, similar misgivings were there, but finally when the MNF Ben came on board, and when the elections took place and they joined the political mainstream, a lot of things that were then discussed, took up a different, I would say, a different form. But today Mizoram is on the path of development and peace. Similarly, all these Naga groups which are, those who want an agreement, those who are still feel that something more should be done, ultimately it is towards a political process which will lead to fresh elections in Nagaland.
Sure.
So I feel that a lot of the young leaders in these groups are looking forward to that situation.
Right.
So therefore there is an eagerness also on their part to see that a settlement is reached. Though there are very key issues which, as I said earlier, it must appear to the people of Nagaland and also to the leaders and also to the rest of the country that the honor of Nagaland people is also the honor of the Indian Union.
Absolutely. So perception is also key really as far as the issue is concerned, is what you're suggesting. All right, quick closing comments from all my guests with the best way forward, starting first with you, Sandeep.
Well, I would say, since you talked about the deadline, this is anyways a self-imposed deadline. I completely agree with all my fellow panelists. You know, being from that region and knowing, you know, they are very good, I mean, Naga people are very warm, friendly people, but they're, you know, they're very proud about their history, their language, their culture, and honor is going to be key. So any settlement that gives this perception, you know, as they say that justice should not only be done, but it should be seen to be done. I would say the same applies here. And deadline or no deadline, deadlines can be pushed back a little bit, can be worked around, but I think coming up with an honourable solution is the key to having lasting peace in the region.
Okay, all right, Mr. Sen.
I do agree with my colleagues. Point is that maybe the deadline may be pushed a little bit, but at least on fundamentals there should be some agreement. But some basics should be out, in which the adjoining states, they also have some confidence. That is a moot point.
All right, Joyita.
Definitely, I strongly believe that a win-win solution is a necessary, and we have to, it should be a solution that makes everybody happy, and there should be proper clarity of the decisions, and people should be taken on board.
Okay, okay. All stakeholders need to be taken into consideration, and only then an honourable decision should be taken up, is what you're suggesting. Mr. Raya, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I'm a little more hopeful. Of course, deadlines can be pushed behind or even till something is, but definitely everyone should feel, all stakeholders should feel that they have emerged winners. And people of Nagaland should also feel that this whole thing is not about a flag or a constitution. It's about opening up new opportunities, an opportunity that has long been denied because of this year-long struggle. That struggle must end and new era must dawn.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's emerging out of this discussion is, yes, the deadline is looming. 31st is when this deadline comes into effect, but this is a self-imposed deadline and it can be extended, is what the panelists are suggesting. The key thing and the most important of all of this is the fact that we should have an honourable solution to this problem where everyone feels that they have walked away with something. Only then will we see long-lasting peace and a long-lasting solution. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.